I took a 3-year sabbatical. I'm going to tell you what I learned. I'm going to tell you the positives. I'm going to tell you the negatives. And then at the end, I'll give you my advice on if this is something you should consider. So first, let's define what I mean by sabbatical. I took a full break, near zero work. So I still had some work I had to do in that I have investments, so I would have to interact with my investments periodically, not very often. Still have to do your taxes, so still have to get all that kind of stuff to the accountant. I own some other stuff, so for those other businesses, I still had a few things I had to do here or there. Nothing I participated in, but maybe something that I'd have to do from a tax standpoint or a legal standpoint, but almost nothing. And I was still on a board of a robotics company that in the robotics space, and so I had a monthly to quarterly call. But that was it. That pretty much defines everything I did. I barely even read a business book. In fact, I got to a place where I didn't even want to read any more business books. I just took a break. I stopped speaking at events. There's a fella that I helped out. I spoke at 2 of his events during my sabbatical. But that was it. I mean, that pretty much defines everything I did. I was on a full-on, real legit break. When I took my break, I knew I was only taking a break. I originally thought I was going to take it for 2 years. And then one night, my wife and I were at dinner, and I told her that I wanted to get back to work towards the beginning of 2023. And I remember her kind of looking at me, and she's like, really? I don't really feel like you've been that much more present. And that was interesting, and I'm going to talk about that later. And I took another year. My wife would say to some people that I'd retired. I hate the idea of retirement, so I had a negative reaction to that. I'd always correct it. I'm not retired. Like you could take short retirements, but I was like, I like the word sabbatical. I did not like the word retirement. But that's what it looked like for me. So let me tell you about the phases that I went through, and then we'll get into the positives and negatives. So phases. I went through 3 phases. Maybe these are like the phases of depression or anger. There are phases to different emotions. So in the very beginning, as soon as I took my break, and know that for 20-something years, I had been going, building stuff, working a lot. And so now I have nothing. I mean, I have nothing I have to do. Nobody I have to deal with, nobody I have to talk to. And there was a period where the only way I know how to describe it in hindsight is to say I was sort of lost. And lost feels like too strong of a descriptor. I was just off. Something didn't feel right. I can't put my finger on it. But when I started my break, my sabbatical, we were also in COVID. So that was a weird time. So it's really hard to figure out what was this about. But I do have a theory. And one of my theories is when I took my break, I don't remember I let my diet fall apart. I don't remember how I did on exercise, but I kind of think my exercise fell apart. It wasn't as though I wasn't doing it. I just wasn't doing nearly as much of it. But that whole health thing wasn't ideal. Let's put it that way. And some of that has to do with the fact we ended up traveling so much. But I think that probably impacted why I felt off. But there was more going on. I think I just didn't have a thing anymore. I didn't have a problem to work on. I didn't have people that needed me, people that needed coaching. I didn't have a thing that I was working on that felt like forward progress in life. So I went through that phase, and then I got to this place where I sort of arrived at acceptance. And I started thinking, I have enough stuff going on in life. We're doing enough stuff. I have enough hobbies, enough fun things that I'm spending time on. I could do this the rest of my life. If I never worked again, I'd be okay. I could make this work. I could find plenty of fun stuff to do, interesting things to do. And then that phase lasted for a little while, but I never, even during that phase, thought I wasn't going to work again. And then finally, I got to the phase of, I'm ready for something else. It's almost like I had been rejuvenated. I had my energy back. It's like, okay, I can see how I can get charged up and I can work really hard again like I used to work. But there was a period there, it's like, man, where am I going to find the motivation and the energy to do what I used to do? And that's what I think it takes to build something. So let's talk about some of the positives. So you might it's probably, before I tell you the positives, actually, it's probably good to tell you my situation. So when I took my sabbatical, I was 44. So I had been doing this a long time. If you're 28 or 33, I was ahead of you. I had a few years on you and a few years of work on you. So I was 44 when I decided to take my break. I got married really young and we had kids fairly young. And so both my boys had graduated high school. This sort of messes up. If you've got kids in school and you want to take a break, like you can't, what can you do? I mean, you're committed to the kids being at home. You can't travel as much unless you do homeschool. You can't take as many vacations. They've got sports. There's all this stuff. So you might have a lot of limitations where you don't really get to do all the cool things that you could normally do when you're taking a break. I was in the fortunate position at 44, my kids were done. They didn't need me. And so I had complete freedom. Now, what did I experience? The positives, zero stress. I didn't feel like I was overly stressed before. I wouldn't describe my state as being one of high stress, but stress level still came down. It's cool to be able to do anything you want and to wake up in the morning and not feel like you have to look at what's on your calendar and think, I got to do that call. I have to have that conversation. Like just all those things that you're like, I got to deal with that today. There's none of those. That's a pretty cool feeling. It's a cool feeling to know that, it's kind of that feeling when it's Saturday. I don't know, you wake up on Sunday and you're like, tomorrow's the work day, not today. Today we're off. I don't know if that means anything to you, but it's just that feeling like I have nothing today. This is nice. You have that all the time. And there is something to be said for that, or at least for a period of time. The summary on this would be, I am 100% happy I did it. I really, really am happy I did it. It's something I will do again because I don't ever intend to not work. I don't like the idea of retirement. I think working is what we were built to do. And I also think working leads to you living a long time as long as you don't, kill yourself with stress. And so I see after having this experience, my takeaway would be there will be another season in life where I take another break. And so I didn't give you tons of positives other than to say you have complete freedom, no stress, open calendar, you can do whatever you want to do, all the stuff you'd kind of imagine. It's great. But I've got more negatives than positives, but they don't necessarily outweigh the positives. And at the end, I'll give you the summary. So let me tell you about the negatives here. So I had a friend who took a break, and I'd spoke at a couple of his events, and each time I saw him, they're the only two events I spoke at while I was on my break. And both times he would ask me, are you working again? What are you doing? What are you working on? I'm like, no, taking a full-on break. I did that. I lost momentum. I remember he was in my head. He would say, I lost momentum. I shouldn't have done that. And I agree. You really do lose a lot of momentum taking a break, but I'm okay. He doesn't seem to be okay with it. I'm okay with it. But I also took mine later in life than he took his. And so I think he was around 30 when he took his break. And I don't think I needed one back then, but I think a little later, it was a good plan. But I agree, and this is a negative, you absolutely lose momentum. You lose momentum in terms of your personal progress, your self-development, your wealth creation, your building of whatever. Yes, you truly do lose momentum in a bunch of areas, but I also believe life is quite significantly, and building businesses are quite significantly about energy management. And so there's also something to be said about getting re-energized and about doing something new and exciting. I've heard of a lot of people that have sold their companies and they've rolled right into the next thing, and they roll into it. It's like, how much thought went into the thing that you're about to commit the next 10 years of your life to? And are you super excited about it? And so I felt I wanted to wait until I was really excited about my next thing in life, or whatever that next thing was going to be. And so I could go in and do it. I believe things take about a decade to do in a really meaningful way, or more. And so I wanted to be super excited. So yes, I lost momentum, but I also got re-energized and I was ready for my next adventure, and I had the energy to do it. Another problem with the sabbatical is you can do anything you want, whenever you want, and that's really not the ideal lifestyle. It just doesn't lead to personal growth. It doesn't lead to, there's something to be said for having a routine. Another thing, it's really hard to restart. So after you take years off and you don't have to do anything, and you have all these things that you found to do in life, and you've said yes to lots of things, and you can go out and do whatever you want whenever, you can go travel whenever you want, you can do all that stuff, it's kind of hard to turn all that stuff off and dial it back. There's maybe things that you now do that you never did before because you couldn't do them when you're working, like just little things, maybe around your home or just miscellaneous stuff you did that always got ignored, delayed, pushed off, or contracted to somebody else, but now you're doing them because what else are you going to do? And then you've got to shed all that stuff again. You've got to retrain yourself to get back into full-on work mode. So the restart, this isn't like a strike against it. It's just a little bit, there's something to it. I realized how much stuff I had led into my life that, like, I didn't have a personal assistant anymore. And so there's all these kinds of things I had to do. There was just stuff that I would have normally contracted out that maybe I did it, because what else am I going to do? Watch Netflix? That doesn't interest me. And so I had got used to doing all this stuff that now somebody else has to do. So whenever, as an example, I went back to work, I had to hire somebody that comes to my house every week and has a list of all the things that they might do around my house. Just, silly stuff, just to be really clear. Like, in the winter, you got to pull in the cushions from your outdoor or your outdoor patio equipment, or cleaning the garages, or like there's a million little things. I got fountains, or 3 fountains around my house that have to be filled periodically, and you've got to deal with the water and stuff like that. It's like those. Maybe kind of boring to hear all this, but my point is those little things, they bleed into your life that maybe you didn't do before, and as a result, now you have to get rid of all this stuff that you've accumulated and you've started doing, because that stuff will keep you from being really successful later. And I've noticed that in a lot of different ways. So those are some of the negatives. None are really that bad, are they? I mean, they're pretty good. The biggest negative that I would say I learned, and so I'm going to give you now a list of learnings, is that you might have told yourself a story all these years. One day I'm going to take a break, or one day I'll retire, and then when I do, I'm going to get in really great shape. I'm going to be way healthier than I've been. And I will tell you that is actually, I think it's easier to do when you're working than when you're on a break. Because when you're on a break, you have no routine. Maybe now you're traveling. Maybe now you go out even more on the weekends. Maybe you go out more during the week. I mean, it adds all these opportunities to go eat out, have crappy meals, go have drinks with friends. Now, maybe you were doing all that in the work world with all your business meetings, but it's just a ton of opportunity to do that type of stuff. I'm embarrassed to say that at the height of my break, I gained probably 20 pounds. Now, I was still working out, but that was from never-ending travel. We just traveled all the time, and you can't not eat the food in all these other countries. And so it adds up. And that's a negative. And the biggest negative I want to make sure I was clear on is if you are telling yourself a story, and I've heard this from others, that once you retire or take a break, you will get in great shape. It doesn't normally happen. It happens sometimes. I found it to not be easy. I found it to be difficult. One of my other learnings is and I kind of alluded to this earlier, after I took my break, I didn't realize how much time I needed to just decompress from decades of work. It took me a while to decompress and wind down. Another one, and this will go back to my story about my wife saying, I don't really think you were more present or have been more present. You might say, I'm going to spend a lot more time with my spouse, and maybe you will. And we did when we were traveling, and we traveled a lot. Of course, it was just us. But when we were home, I found a million other things. I'd go do my car stuff because without getting the weeds, I'd go ride dirt bikes. I would work outside and just do random stuff like trim the trees, which had never done before and don't need to do. I just find all these things. I'd organize something because I didn't want to necessarily watch a bunch of TV. And I'll be honest, I did watch more movies than I probably watched in the previous 10 years. But I found other things because I'm used to working. I'm used to doing stuff. And so I found other things to take up my time. And so I think she was right. While I feel like I was more present, I wasn't nearly as, that's what it really is. I was absolutely more present. I wasn't nearly as present as she thought I would be. Great example, because I don't love watching TV. I'd walk around with my AirPods in all the time, listening to an audiobook or listening to a podcast. And that doesn't feel like being present. And so just because the point here is the learning is just because you tell yourself this story that I'm going to take this break and I'm going to fix all these things or be better in all these different aspects of your life, not necessarily. And oftentimes routine is what helps you fix those things. You know, the old saying, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. When you're not very busy, you're just not very productive. And a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily get better. If I were to do it again, the next time I'd give myself a no routine period and then I'd go back to having a routine. And I'm not a person that loves routines, but I believe life is about progress and improvement and growth. And during a time of a sabbatical, one of the things I learned is you don't get much of that stuff. And so that is some of the stuff that leads to being happy. And so it wasn't that I was unhappy, but I didn't feel nearly as good as I feel being back at work. And maybe that's just a little bit of how I'm wired. But I think progress, improvement, and growth, they matter, and you lose some of that during a sabbatical or through retirement. There were other things. Like I thought, because I had done a bunch of tracking and racing of cars well in advance of the sabbatical. And so I thought when I took my break, I was going to do competitive racing and travel, which means you travel, 10 to 20 weekends of the year. Sounds great, and I always said I was going to do that, but then the reality of what that means in terms of time commitment, it's like some of these things I told myself I was going to do, well, they didn't live up to my expectations. Didn't really want to do that as much as I thought I did. Or traveling, and we traveled a ton, and we traveled well before I took the sabbatical, but during the sabbatical, we traveled extensively internationally. And it's exhausting, like telling yourself that someday I'll just travel all the time. It's great for a season, but it's not something you can do forever. I couldn't be retired and travel all the time. It is tiring in and of itself. If any of this sounds like I'm whining or being negative, please don't hear it that way. I am incredibly thankful. I'm just saying, here's some of the things I learned. I told myself these stories. I want to do this. And then when I experienced it, well, that's pretty good, but I still kind of love the work thing. This isn't enough to keep me happy for 40 more years. It's that kind of a thing. So that's what I'm saying. So please don't hear me wrong here. Another learning, I'll give you just a couple others and we'll wrap this up, is I found that I focused more on myself than I focused on others. In business, I focus on others. Like, how can I make it better for my client? How can I make their world better? How can I help them? How can I fix my whatever service or technology to be better for them? When I don't have that focus, I think about optimizing for me. Should I buy this thing? Should I have this thing? How could I improve my house? How could I, there's all these, how can I make my travel better? It's all about, at least for me, a lot of it turned on focusing on me. I just don't think that's healthy. I think a quality life is more focused on other people than yourself. Nothing wrong with optimizing your stuff. Not at all. I'm not saying that, but I just found that more of my time was spent around optimizing for me versus others, and I didn't like that. All my favorite people are entrepreneurs or business people in senior levels. It's engaging for me. It's related to growth and improvement. They're all working. I'm not in that world anymore. I missed that. So I couldn't be gone from that world long term. Final one I'll give you. I'll wrap this up. During this period, I own other stuff. And my most significant other thing that I own that pays me well, we were diverting that money into some real estate projects. And so I had greatly reduced my income from that. And so I was living on investment income for a number of years here. And it's an odd feeling to accumulate a lot. And even if the investment income is more than adequate to cover your lifestyle, to me, it still feels like you're going backwards. Because when you accumulate wealth, you never really want to see that number come down and you want to see it keep growing. And while it was continuing to grow, I was living off that money. It's just this really odd, weird feeling to be living off investment income versus living off the money that comes in from your business. And I don't think I would have mentioned this one, but I've now had a bunch of conversations, and I feel like this is a universal thing that business owners say when they retire. And I've got friends that are retired that are older than me, and it's this weird thing to know you've got a number. So this would be for somebody who's got a smaller number. They've got a number, and they've got to make that last the rest of the year, and they got to live on their investment returns. In my case, I don't really have to worry about ever running out of money, but it still feels weird to not be accumulating. Or I guess I was still accumulating, but like I want to accumulate all of it and just live off my money from my businesses and not spend any of my investments or any of the returns on my investments. And I, again, wouldn't even say this except that I have now heard this from almost every single person that's in this situation. So if you take a break and you're living on your investment income, or you retire and the rest of your life is living on investment income, that is an odd feeling. And that was a learning that I couldn't have told you about previously. So that's a lot of information. I hope it kept your attention, but that's what my personal experience was. That's what I learned. The summary is, I 100% recommend it. I am so thankful I was given this opportunity. I'm so thankful I got to do it. I know that a good friend said you lose momentum. He's right. But I would also say it was worth it in spite of all of that. And if it's something you want to do, I would suggest that you plan for it. You literally say, I'm going to do it on this date. I would recommend you do 90 days to start. If you could do 30 days, that's a great test. You can see how your business holds up, assuming you own a business. And then next, I would say 90. I don't believe 30-day sabbatical is enough. I don't believe you can fully, I couldn't have fully decompressed. I couldn't have got any of the learnings I just described in only 30 days, but 30 days would be wonderful. I mean, I previously had taken trips that were where I was gone from the office for 3 weeks. I'd never done a month, and I didn't decompress in 3 weeks. My brain was still thinking about work. I think you need a minimum of 90 days. Minimum. And so maybe you test with 30 days to make sure the business will be okay. And then you plan it and you schedule 90 days. And I think the key to it is completely gone, completely disconnected. The only reason you get a phone call from the office is full on emergency. But my recommendation is give it a try and try it 90 days first. And then someday out into the future, you might be able to do 6 months. But that's how I would think about it. It's something I will do again.